Hello, everyone, and welcome to our panel. My name is Colleen Carroll, and I serve as the NXUnite lead at Nexus Marketing and will be your moderator for today's panel. Today's panel topic is Crash Course on Nonprofit Executive Management, and I'm really looking forward to this conversation, so I'm going to try to go through this logistics portion as fast as I possibly can so we can just jump into this conversation. NXUnite is made in partnership with Nexus Marketing and serves as a powerful community resource designed to foster connections and facilitate lasting relationships within the mission-driven sector. On NXUnite, you can find upcoming industry events, suggested influencers to follow, trusted solutions, and cause-driven podcasts. NXUnite also provides webinars, demos, and of course, panels with experts such as these lovely folks here with me today. Today's hour-long panel will include time both for questions curated by my team and questions from you all, our fantastic audience. So if you are joining us live, please feel free to start submitting your questions either in the chat or in the questions tab, and we will address as many as we possibly can in the second half of the panel. The earlier you get those questions in, the more likely we'll be able to address it, and the more likely we'll be able to get through a larger number of questions. So if you came into this session with a topic that you want to make sure is addressed, feel free to start sending those questions in now. If you're having any technical difficulties, let us know in the chat. My colleague Anton is here under the Team NXUnite username and will do his best to assist. I did also want to mention that this panel session is being recorded. So if you get to the end and the insight you heard is just so fantastic, you need to hear it a second time right away. That's awesome news. It's going to automatically be in your email inbox at the end of the session. So give it a few minutes after we wrap up, and you'll have access to that recording. Also, just wanted to mention that it will continue to be accessible on the NXUnite website in the on-demand panel section. So if you have any friends in the industry who are like, can't believe they missed it, they needed to be there, feel free to share that same registration page with everyone, and they'll be able to access the recording. All right, finally, before I introduce today's panelists, I want to give a big thank you to our audience, whether you are joining us live, saying hello in the chat and where you're calling in from, or you're watching the recording. Thank you so much for your time and really looking forward to this conversation. To begin with the introductions, I'd first like to introduce Ellen Bristol, who is the president at Bristol Strategy Group. She considers herself a performance management nerd and a geek for metrics, or maybe the other way around. Her mission is to improve the success of nonprofit fundraising by adapting the most beneficial practices of high-performing sales teams and their managers to improve the performance of fundraising teams, including volunteers. She's known for her leaky bucket assessment for effective fundraising, the only popular study of fundraising team productivity in the sector. Ellen, glad to have you on this panel. Also joining us today is Eric Morchevsky, who is the CEO at NMBL Strategies. Eric is a dynamic, seasoned leader that sets the tone at NMBL Strategies and in turn for NMBL's extensive portfolio of clients. Whether it be strategic planning for nonprofits to merger and acquisition work for small businesses to turnaround work with the court-appointed receiverships, his deep and varied experience make him a coveted leader to create extraordinary change, growth, and success. With NMBL Strategies, Eric has led the strategic planning efforts for America's Black Holocaust Museum and the International Association of Black Actuaries, the project consulting for Thanksgiving Square and Gate of the Zhang River International Design Competition, among many other projects. Eric took his background as a global consultant, CEO, and CFO to found NMBL Strategies in 2019 after leading the Gateway Arch Park Foundation, a private foundation responsible for providing $250 million of the $380 million project, through the largest public-private partnership in National Park Service history. Nimble was built to tie in Eric's love of startups and turnarounds with data analytics, strategy, and finance blended through experience working with nonprofits, public-private partnerships, and small businesses. Eric, thanks for being here with us today. Also joining us today is Maryanne Dersch, founder and chief excitement officer at Courageous Communication. Maryanne specializes in helping nonprofit organizations easily increase their influence and connect with new donors so that they can raise more money without feeling rejected, ineffective, or pushy. Her effervescent badassery calls you to be more influential in your work, life, and even in your own view of self. She has spent almost 30 years working in the nonprofit world, helping organizations communicate more effectively internally and externally. From those experiences, she authored Courageous Communication: Why Codependence is Making Your Nonprofit Brand Boring and What to Do About It. From her years in the biz, Maryanne understands that you can't change how your organization communicates without changing the culture that supports the communication, and it takes good leaders to mold that culture. Courageous Communication helps you understand your gifts and value and helps others around you do the same. From board to staff to volunteers to clients, you will have a culture that embodies authentic communication. You will operate with confidence about what will happen instead of fear of what might happen. Maryanne, thanks for being here. Finally, joining us here today is Tom Berekoff, International Board Chair at CFRE and also the CEO of TPB Strategic Council, a Canadian-based consultancy serving charitable and not-for-profit organizations, philanthropic businesses, and individuals. Over his 35-plus-year career, Tom has helped organizations raise millions to advance their mission, support beneficiaries, leading to positive impact, outcomes, and change. He has a wide breadth of leadership, fundraising, and external relations experiences, including higher education, continuing education, healthcare, sports, arts and culture, economic and community development, rural and remote context, international development, Indigenous peoples, social investment, and faith-based organizations. Tom, thank you so much for being here with us today. All right, it is finally time for us to jump in and get started. And Ellen, I'm going to have you start us off with our very first question. What are the fundamental principles of effective nonprofit executive management, and how do they contribute to an organization's long-term success and impact?
You would have to start with me, right? Thanks a lot. Okay. There's a constant in management and leadership, regardless of the sector. And that is clarity of vision, ability to focus and resist the distractions or ride over them, and understand that what am I trying to say? You never step into the same river twice, but you know where you're going. In other words, as a leader, having clarity on where you want to take the organization does not vary, although economic or technological or societal conditions may and will change, sometimes radically. The leaders' both challenge and joy is, how can I get us there, wherever our there is, in alignment with these societal, etc. changes? And we also have to understand a slight difference between leadership, setting direction and inspiring others to follow, and management, which is more operationally focused. So let's get somebody else's.
Thank you, Ellen, for starting us off. Tom, I'm going to bring this same question over to you. What do you see as the fundamental principles of effective nonprofit executive management, and how do they contribute to an organization's long-term success?
Thanks, Colleen. And on behalf of CFRE International, just thanks for the opportunity to be with this great group today and a great starter question. I'm going to be really quick. Some real core rubrics: communications, internally and externally. Really important that you've got a constant through line in terms of what that message is. Next is understanding the boundaries between governance and management. Mm-hmm. There are places for you to be informal about that exchange and dialogue, but it's really important that everybody knows how to stay in their lane as well. having and working the plan, and Ellen said it so well, but having and working that plan, staying in your lane as it relates to what you have in mind as priority, but also being nimble enough to adapt to market conditions and opportunities and challenges that arise. And then we talk about this a lot in the context of how board of governors, boards of directors work, fiduciary, strategic, and generative responsibilities. What does that really mean? Fiduciary, that's fiscal and risk oversight. That's the board's responsibility. Strategic, do we have that plan? And it's not just a strategic plan, it's an operational plan. And then the generative, where are we ideating together? Where are we thinking innovatively? Where are the opportunities and challenges that arise in the moment that affect our organizations? We need to do that as a collaborative between board and management. And then finally, my always, as a Drucker devotee, is the 5 most important questions. What's our mission? Who's our customer? What do they want? What are the results? And what are we going to do? If we can stay true to those basic questions, we're going to win as an organization. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Tom. All right, Maryanne, I saw you were nodding at one point. What are your thoughts on the fundamental principles of effective nonprofit executive management?
Tom got me all fired up because he's talking about how important communication is. And I was like, yes, because that is one thing that is so imperative that people really don't address. And that's what I work with folks on, is really, how do our thoughts and feelings contribute to our everyday decision making? Because a lot of times we're operating out of fear. We're operating, out of like what won't happen, what we think won't happen, or what, right? And that creates, whenever we operate out of fear, we create more fear. And so there's 3 principles that I encourage people to adopt, that I work with my clients on. And that is, first and foremost, an abundance mindset. I don't know who taught us a long time ago that there's only so much money for philanthropy. And that's the biggest lie we've ever told. And it keeps us desperate and hungry when we don't need to be. So there's enough for all of us. There's enough for everyone. We just have to connect to it, and that's okay. Alignment means what I say and what I do work as closely as possible. So if I say I care about kids or I care about building strong families, but we're working our people so hard they don't have time for their families, that's out of alignment, right? So what I say and what I do are as close as possible. And I call that eating my own cooking, right? As a leader, I eat my own cooking. I wouldn't tell you something to do that I would never do. And the third thing is authenticity. There's so much, what I want to say, I don't want to swear because this is a polite conversation, but there's so much BS in the world. What people want is for people to show up authentically, right? So when I, as a leader, can show up my authentic self in alignment, operating from abundance, I come across very powerfully. And then we start operating from possibility and opportunity instead of fear and scarcity.
Thank you so much, Maryanne. All right, Eric, any final thoughts on those fundamental principles of effective nonprofit executive management?
I mean, other than I think we could all use a double shot of whatever Maryanne has in her, her daily energy. I feel like I'd get 3 times more done every day. But I think, I think everyone summed it up really nicely here. I think when we go into situations where we're working with clients, we really are trying to make sure that, as Tom said, they're starting from a base direction. So that's their strategy, and they know where they're going, and they're all heading there, together, hopefully. And that strategy needs to include operationally how they get there. But then, to Maryanne's point, they need to be authentic, they need to be true, and they need to be moving that ball forward internally and externally. And a lot of that does come from working with people and communicating that to everyone, and making sure that that aligned message is understood, and from top to bottom, from board to intern and to volunteer, so that everyone can be moving in the right direction at the same time.
Wonderful. Thank you, Eric. Ellen, did you want to jump back in?
Yeah, I wanted to just add something. One of the ways, and I've done a lot of research on this, one of the ways we fail in our communications is internally. We don't really talk to each other the right way, and we don't report on data to one another adequately so that people truly understand, if we set out to accomplish X by Y date, how close did we get? What's holding us back? And all that stuff. Because what I see is a massive disconnect between what the board and senior leadership might be going on in fundraising and what's actually going on in fundraising. So our internal communications make it possible to fulfill Maryanne's dictum of appropriate external communications.
Wonderful. We are off to a great start with this conversation. Quick reminder to our audience that you are welcome to start submitting those questions now. If something one of our panelists says inspires you, you have a follow-up question, send it over in the questions tab or in the chat. All right, Maryanne, I'm going to have you start us off with our next one. In the ever-evolving landscape of nonprofit leadership, what strategies can organizations employ to attract and engage board members who are actively involved in driving the mission forward?
All right. I have a lot of thoughts on this, and I'm just going to say what I find to be work best is when we work with boards, as far as, and I'm assuming you're saying we're driving the mission forward. That means that's fundraising, right? Is that what we're talking about? Okay. I do not think that board members need to ask for money. I think that is a high level skill. I'm not going to take one gymnastics lessons and jump into the Olympics. Okay. This is a high level skill. But what happens is if there's resistance to fundraising, or if we're looking for a magic wand, we'll say, oh, I just need these corporate people. I need people with money, and then I'll have money. And so what I find is, again, I opened with like operating from abundance, is board members can be great tools as far as creating prospects. They don't have to ask anybody for anything. They don't have to make anybody do anything. They just, if there's an alignment, if there's interest, send them on. If not, that's totally okay. And with that is really helping them and guiding them into that, not just saying, hey, can you call a couple of people? How do you make the call? Who is your list? What do you say? Help them practice the conversation. And then they'll be great lead generators. But the most important thing is that you can't make people care about your organization. And that's what when we put the money before the relationship, that makes it feel icky. Remember I said, rejected, ineffective, or pushy, right? Those are my things. So we don't want to make it feel icky. And we just want to, if there's alignment, great. If not, that's okay too. You literally can't mess it up. It's not about what you say. It's not about making a pitch. It's just how you make people feel. And if you feel like there's alignment, pass it on. If not, that's totally okay. And for me, that is the most effective way to get people engaged, because whether or not they become donors or other board members or whatever, they respect you and they feel seen, and they feel like it was a meaningful, worthwhile conversation.
Thank you so much, Maryanne, for starting us off there. Eric, I'm going to bring this question over to you. If we want to attract and engage board members who are actively involved, what do we need to do?
So I guess I didn't see this as exclusively a fundraising question when, where I see it as we run into a lot of dysfunctional boards who are purely passion-based. And so they love the mission, they love the organization, but they don't really know what they're doing. And so what we oftentimes do when we're working with organizations, especially organizations that maybe have a very dysfunctional board, or they either very driven or alternatively very disengaged, we start very basic. We start to align what the skill sets are of the board members, and do they have experience as other board members? Do they have people with finance experience? Do they have people with legal experience, fundraising experience? And where are there gaps within the board? And I think as you start to fill those gaps in a very systematic way, I think you can really start to move the organization along as a whole, because you're starting to make sure that your whole board can best represent your organization, and that it is foolish to think that someone who has had a whole career in HR can do your budgets for your organization. And it's foolish to think that I am a finance person, so I'm biased there, but that I should be making HR judgment calls on how something should be handled, or communications practices. But inevitably, as an organization, at some point, you're going to need your leadership to say, here's the best way for us to handle this, and here's how we can do it. sometimes you're going to have to go outside for it. Sometimes you're going to have to if you have to go through crisis management issues, you may have to go to a PR firm to actually help you go through those issues. But having someone who's qualified to make that judgment call of when you need to go outside and when you can handle it internally really helps to make sure your organization keeps moving things along. And yeah, I do think one of those things that we do analyze is whether someone can write big checks or whether someone knows the groups that can get your organization into the groups writing big checks. So there is a fundraising component, but that doesn't need to be everybody. But it can't be overlooked either. So I think really making sure you understand the skill sets of your board, and then keeping them engaged. So the other piece there then is continuous education for your board members, making sure that they understand their roles and responsibilities as a board of directors, and that they're feeling like they're engaged in a meaningful manner. Because if they start to feel like either they've been engaged for too long or they don't feel like the organization is moving in the direction they feel it should be, or number of other reasons that they can disengage from the organization, you've really lost that opportunity to work with them. And it's probably time to go start looking at additional board members. We usually use the board to say, who do you know that can fill in these gaps? And then really start to look to build out the board. The other one piece I will add in is don't have too big of a board of directors. We've run into organizations with 50 and 60 and 70 board members, and the common denominator in those boards is someone else will do it. So I have a personal preference towards about a 10 to 15 person board, but I think that's kind of my other piece is keep the board small enough that people know what their roles and responsibilities are, ideally with an annual plan for those board members.
Thank you so much, Eric. Before we hear from our other two panelists, I do want to let our audience know that we have had a poll go live where we've asked you all what your experience attracting and engaging impactful board members has been. If you would like to fill that out, that poll is live. Please feel free to do so now. All right, Ellen, over to you. Thoughts on how we can attract and engage board members that are going to be impactful?
Sure. I am a big fan of setting high expectations. I find if you set low expectations, people will live up to them, okay? And if you set high expectations, guess what? So before I say anything more, I want to go back to a term Maryanne used a few moments ago, fiduciary. Fiduciary doesn't mean just taking care of the money. The dictionary definition is acting on behalf of others. So the first thing we need to do when recruiting boards is find out how passionate they are about our mission, our cause, our programs. And then make it clear that their job isn't just to say, we don't like the money you're spending on office supplies, or we think you should hire my brother-in-law's nephew to do our web design. It's to say, how is what we're doing representing the needs of the population we serve? If they can't do that, we're in big trouble, because then they become either inert or combative, and that's really disturbing. Inert boards, you really want to blow off some dynamite around their feet and say, wake up. So we have inert boards, we have combative boards, but we don't seem to have standards for recruiting board members. And this is an area where, as deep a believer as I am in the abundance mindset, I think we have to stand up and say, we are worth the best, and be very selective. I would rather have a board of 7 dedicated people with a different set of experience behind them than an inert board of 15 people who don't give a damn and just show up to eat your snacks and drink your booze. That doesn't cut it for me. So I'm also a big believer in term limits for board members. We all get too comfortable in our positions. And as someone who has close to 8 decades life experience under her belt, I can tell you, things are changing, right? I love the idea of, in fact, there's something I always do is I issue an extremely simple template that's called the Board Skills and Talents Matrix. It says, okay, everybody on this board, no matter how many people there are, has to have a passion for what we're doing. If they lose that passion, here's your plaque, thanks a lot, next. Then some of them have to have some banking or legal or marketing or entrepreneurship or lived experience. You know, if we're providing services to usher people out of homelessness or whatever it is, let's have some successful graduates from our program sit on our board. They're bound to understand whether or not our messaging, our programs, our operations are truly designed to feed the mission. So this is an instance where making it hard for people, it's like Harvard, you know? Harvard admits, 12 people a year and 9 million applications come in. I'm exaggerating for effect, folks. I don't know the actual ratios. But instead of just saying, and I've seen this too many times, an ad goes out on Facebook, a posting goes out on LinkedIn, there's even an ad in the paper. We're looking for board members. Hello? There's nothing that says, if you're interested here, fill out this form. There's an application process, there's a vetting process, there's a so-and-so process. So my thinking is that's what makes board service desirable, that you have to compete to be to be qualified to serve on this team.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Ellen. All right, Tom, over to you. How can we make sure we're attracting and engaging board members that will move our mission forward?
Hey, thanks, Colleen. And I agree with everything everybody has said. I have a little bit of a twist on it. We have to stop recruiting people to be board members and recruit them to do board. We need people who are activated and really committed to implementing mission, vision, et cetera. Part of the way of doing that is really understanding what are their interests coming in to the organization, because as much of anything, they're interviewing us as we are to them to get involved with the organization. And part of this includes some sense of, so what are you asking me to do? Is that a job description? Is that a pro forma of some kind? So the board member really understands what the expectations are. And we're going to hold them and the organization, accountable for that as well. I think formal and informal assessments, feedback loops are really important so that the organization really can be driven towards mission and not be focused upon the little minutia within the organization that tends to drown us out, prevent us from doing the things we're supposed to do. That's all.
Thank you so much, Tom. All right, we are having a great time, but I can see we're already halfway through our session, and we've had some.
Can I just share one thing really quick?
Yep.
Really quick, okay? So one of the best things anyone ever did to me as a board member was every summer, the ED and the board president and the development director, and we'd have lunch. I go and it was 1 hour, nice tight hour, and the question they asked me is, what could we do to make this the best board experience you've ever had? And because I was intimidated. I don't get intimidated. I'm not a guy with ties. I don't know insurance. I can't read a financial spreadsheet. What in the world am I doing here? And they're like, what do you want to be doing here? I said, I teach you how to tell your story better. Let's do that. And the next board meeting, or a couple of times after, I worked with the board and I gave them this whole thing. They got to meet me. And the second thing I asked is, I want to go to the bar downstairs after the meeting, because I wanted to get to know people. I don't know these people. I don't know how they make decisions. And when people get intimidated, they go quiet and you're not getting the best stuff out of them. So anyway, just those little one-on-ones. It's so simple. It's like the feedback loop you're talking about, Tom. Those little one-on-one, like, and the question was, how can we make this the best board experience you've ever had? And if that's how you go into it, you're gonna be winning.
I love that, because a board is only effective if it operates as a team. And you can't become a team if you meet one another on Zoom once every 4 weeks or once every 8 weeks, and you sit there and listen to reports.
Thank you both. I was saying I have 2 more questions that I know I sent over panelists in advance, but we also have a lot of audience questions. So we're going to go through these 2 a little bit fast so we can get to the fun audience ones. But really want to say how much I'm enjoying this conversation, and thank you all. Eric, I'm going to have you start us off. In the context of nonprofit executive management, how can leaders effectively balance short-term operational challenges with long-term strategic planning and vision?
So I think what we typically recommend to clients is not spending too much of their day focused on the long term. And what I mean by that is develop a strategic plan, go back to it and make sure that you're still following that path. Don't set it aside, or don't just say, well, that's what we were told to do 3 years ago. The best example I can give is we started our company in June of 2019, and we did a strategic plan for ourselves. And guess what happened in March of 2020? That completely wasn't in our plans. And so you can't just ignore it. But at the same time, we talk to groups that sometimes want to go back and every month update their strategic plan. And that's just not the best use of their time. It's something that if something dramatic happens, so you can use time as your deciding factor of when to go back and look at it, but you can also use qualifying events like a COVID would have an impact on your organization. And so really making sure that your day-to-day, your operational activities are following that plan. And if not, then you need to go step back and say, okay, why are we not following our long-term plan? But then I think the other piece in there is strategy probably has changed quite a bit from 30, 50 years ago, in that a strategic plan used to probably be a 15, 20, 50-year document. And I think over the years that's scaled to 10, and then it's to 5, and now it's to 3. Ellen was talking a little bit about her background being in software earlier, and I think software is probably the greatest observation as to why we have to change and why we're probably down to 3 to 5 years in strategic planning, and that they say technology doubles its capacity every 18 months at this point in society. So how we handle some of those things really has to change, because we're aligning new thought processes to how the world evolves in those 18 months. I talk a lot to friends about the fact that my son, who's 11, probably will never learn to drive a car because of where we evolve in self-driving cars. And that's only a 5-year gap. So how does your organization play through those same thought processes? And you can't start thinking about what you're doing 20 years from now if you don't know what's going to happen 5 years from now. So I think balancing understanding what long-term means. So understanding that long-term probably means 3 to 5 years, balancing that your focus is really on operations and day-to-day, just making sure that it's aligning to your mission. And I could see Ellen wanted to chime in somewhere in there.
We will get to Ellen. Thank you so much, Eric. Ellen, did you want to jump in? Okay. Maryanne, I'm going to bring this question over to you next. How can we balance our short-term and our long-term vision?
I agree with what Eric said, the constantly changing definition of what short-term and long-term means. But I'm going to bring it down into some really practical terms that I feel like has been really effective. I agree. Long-term, 3 years out. What I found so effective when I work with organizations is we look at a year, all right? And this is so simple. So take this if you want it, 90 minutes for 90 days. We spend 90 minutes planning our next 90 days. What is our goal? What is our outcomes? What do we want to achieve? And then, okay, right now I'm working with a team. Hey, our 90 days, and we're getting so much done and staying so focused. So that's a little strategy that I would just like, that I think is really helpful as far as keeping that short term moving.
Thank you so much, Maryanne. All right, Tom, short term versus long term. What do we need to consider?
Hey, great. I'll be quick as well. Be tangible and realistic. Less is more. Simplify, clarify, do. My own approach is the rule of three, maximum of 3 strategies, goals, actions, and measures. If we can keep it simple, we're not disrupting everything in the organization as we try to move it ahead. Get to the root of the cause, the problem, the opportunity. I use the Y5 model to really help me. Too often we treat symptoms in our organizations, but we really don't get to what the problem is or the real opportunity lies. And then finally, keep mission in mind. Always, mission and vision in mind. We're very, very prone to shiny baubles. And while we need to be nimble, we need to take great care not to get so distracted by those things. And then I guess just finally, once a challenge is resolved, what did we learn? What can be done to prevent it? What can be done to accelerate it in the future?
Thank you so much, Tom. All right, Ellen, final thoughts on balancing the short term and the long term.
2 words, continuous improvement. When we start out with a client working on strategic planning, we invariably say, look, right now, the target is only 12 months. But we also say, what is our vision? How will our organization have changed the world 10, 20, 50, 100 years from now? Mission, what are we doing now to get closer to that vision? Which means we achieve a few missions. The missions will change more frequently than the vision changes because we're getting closer and closer to operations. I don't like to write 3 or 5 year plans because then the team says, okay, we finished our plan now what? So our recommendation is always every year, revisit your plan. Well, every day, follow the key performance indicators, the business rules, and so on that you've set down. Adjust to external conditions or internal conditions if required. But at least once a year, you have a deep dive into what, if anything, needs to change in the tactics, the objectives, the actions. What, if anything, needs to change in the objectives, the goals, or the mission? Because the long term, how do we want to change the world, isn't going to shift that much. If we could cure, let's say, poverty by handing out a pill, and somebody gave us those pills, we could change our whole operational theme and make sure everybody who's in poverty gets a pill, right? So the way to do continuous improvement is measurement. Have data, because what gets measured gets done. And you can't manage it if you can't, or improve it if you can't measure it. Those things, the success targets might change, but the things that are being measured are likely not to change.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Ellen. All right, because of where we are at with time, I'm going to switch us over to our audience questions for a little bit. We'll come back to that final question if we have time, but panelists, if anyone had your heart set on that 4th question that I was going to ask, please send me a message in the chat and I will make sure you get asked it. But I wanted to address some of our amazing audience questions that have come in. Tom, I'm going to have you start us off. Someone asked in the chat, for a small organization, what is the ideal number of board members? 10 to 15 seems like a lot.
It does seem like a lot to me. I personally like the 7-digit, and I use an odd number, somewhere between 5 and 9. And I think it's manageable. I think it gives you enough bench strength at the board table to be able to do the things you need to do, but not too cumbersome so that management is spending most of their time feeding the board rather than executing on mission.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Tom. I was seeing some nods of agreement. Does anyone else want to jump in terms of board size for a small, or do we feel good about that? All right. Eric, did you want to jump in?
I was just going to say, small organization means something different to everybody. I talk to organizations with $5 million budgets that consider themselves small, and I talk to organizations with $50,000 budgets that consider themselves small. So I think Tom probably nicely described maybe an organization that's probably under about $500,000 in revenues and annual revenues for the year. As you grow, there's probably a reason that you might be starting to identify other characteristics needed in board members. And so I think probably grow the board more in line with where you are as an organization versus just trying to hit specific numbers at any given time.
Thank you, Eric. Maryanne, question for you. We had a question in the chat. Any ideas about how to fire a board member?
I'm so glad you asked me this. God, okay. Katie, my friend. First I want to talk about, what are you afraid to say? What haven't you said to this point that the situation has gotten so fractured that you need to dismiss someone? Because what we ideally, ideally our goal is to be able to give and receive feedback in the moment, open communication. So let's use that as a goal. Right now, I want to say is you're just having a difficult conversation. The difficult conversation is this relationship isn't working out. And that's an okay thing to have, and it happens a lot. And the idea would be it's not so much as what you need to say, it's asking those questions. How are things going? What's that? Because ideally, because I teach people influence, right? That means getting people you have no authority over to do what you want them to do. I want them to come to the decision that it's not a good idea for them, right? So, and in a sense of, instead of worry less about what you want to say and being present with that person and asking the questions and looking for, I don't want to get too detailed into this, it's less about what you say and more about asking the questions. How's it going? How can I serve you better? And then allowing them to come to the decision themselves that this just isn't a good fit. And I'm going to say one more thing is, the thing that we don't want to feel the most is guilt and shame. And we'll almost do anything to avoid that feeling. So if you make it okay for them, hey, this is we want to relieve them of that. Whatever happens is totally okay. I'll love and respect you no matter what. That really helps people dismiss, because the reason that is that they feel bad. Nobody wants to get fired. That's going to trigger a bunch of stuff. So it's kind of moving it into mutual separation area. That's what I would say.
Thank you, Maryanne. Ellen, did you want to jump in here?
Yeah, I wanted to add something. John Carver, the guy who invented policy governance, a lot of people, he's a bit of a controversial figure, but there's something in his work on policy governance that has always intrigued me. And I think it's worth repeating here. First, the idea is you make it very clear what the board's expectations are. What are the expectations of fulfilling your role of board service? And then the simple statement is, and it kind of goes in the bylaws, if a board member fails to live up to such expectations, they are deemed to have resigned. So we need to have clarity at both ends of this. Delivering that message, I love the way Maryanne talks about it, because it is compassionate, it's gentle, but the simple fact is sometimes we have to do what we hate doing. Ask somebody to go. Tell an employee they're no longer a fit for our organization. I could go on and on. But governance is a little bit different from other volunteer work. And if they're not living up to what's expected of them, it's done, you know? And you put it in the bylaws and you say, here's what you haven't done.
Thank you, Ellen. Eric, did you want to jump in here?
I was going to say, really to Ellen's point, I mean, when a board member comes on, they should get a job description. They should understand exactly what their roles and responsibilities are. And our other big thing is every year at an annual board retreat of some sort, that can vary in what that means, they should be developing an annual plan that says in first quarter, I'm going to be doing these things. And so ultimately they know whether or not they're doing what they're supposed to be doing. If the reason you're trying to transition someone out is just because you disagree with them, that's not really in the mentality of a nonprofit. And so I think why? So it really shouldn't be one person's decision ever either, in that whether you're the executive director or the board chair, it's not your call to transition a board member out. If they're not delivering, that's one thing. But if it's a disagreement, if it's a personality issue, that needs to be a group board decision, not just a, I don't like that person, therefore they're out, because you're really not living the mentality and the mantra of the organization at that point. So I think if you can make sure that people understand what their expectations are and include them in the development of those expectations on an annual basis through their own planning, and then make sure that if you are transitioning someone out, making sure that it is a group decision and not an individual decision that also protects the organization.
Thank you, Eric. Tom?
Just really briefly, I think getting to that culminating event as firing a board member, hopefully that's not a surprise to them, because if it is, it's as much on us, the organization. And hopefully, again, we've got transparency, we've got good communication, we've got expectation about performance. And those things should be iterative in terms of the relationship between board member and the organization. If they're not, the firing event is as much on us, the organization, as it is them.
Thank you so much, all. Unbelievably, we are getting towards the end of our time, so I am going to have us start moving towards the wrap-up portion of this session. That said, we had some really amazing questions come in here that we didn't get a chance to address, and I want to make sure those who submitted the questions get your questions answered. So if you have any lingering questions, whether you put it in the chat or it's just in your own head, please fill out this survey that we have just sent out. The Team NXUnite team has just sent it out. This is a survey where we ask you if there's a particular panelist you want to make sure we put you in touch with so they can answer your questions. So let us know. I want you to get your questions answered. I'm sorry we didn't get to them today, but we'll just have to do a part 2, is what I'm learning. All right, I have one final question for our panelists to close us out, so we hear from everyone one final time. What do you see as the future for nonprofits, and how can nonprofit executives get ahead today? Tom, can I have you start us off with this one?
Yeah, it's a great question. So we're in a constant era of change. Live with it, embrace it, take advantage of it. Most importantly, today is the time where we need to do what we say we're going to do. Speak in real terms about impacts, outcomes, and change. Let's not communicate about our inputs and outputs, but about the outcomes. That's a performance model that increasingly the donor and our general public and our membership is expecting. We're moving past that time of unconditional loyalty to the organization. It's about what we're doing, not what we say we're going to do alone. Member-based organizations are going to increasingly find challenges unless they can articulate a value proposition. That value proposition needs to be internally, but externally as well to who you serve. For the nonprofit professional, it's time to be connected to your constituency as champions for the mission, the lifelong learners and lovers of people who care about your organization. This is the time for you and your organization to invest in your professional development so that you know you're doing the right things in the right ways, and those right ways and right things are changing, and hence the importance of professional development. And as much as our world is becoming smaller, what's global is local, and a term given to me recently, glocal, I think we need to be mindful of that. Increasingly, our donors are giving closer to home, and they want to achieve big things at home. And I think what we learn at home can be extrapolated and used on a national, regional, global scale as well. So our world is changing. Live it, love it, enjoy it.
Thank you so much, Tom. All right. Eric, moving over to you. What do you see as the future for nonprofits, and how can our nonprofits get ahead today?
I think the biggest change that I'm seeing kind of on a daily basis is that change from where passion isn't enough, where organizations for years have operated off the passion and drive of a few key people, and that's been great. We've probably ground them into the dirt because we've worked them so hard during all of that. But at this point, there needs to be data behind why you're doing something. There needs to be a reason why you're doing something. There also needs to be a collaboration. I mean, we're seeing more and more donors saying, you know, I'll fund this, I'll sponsor this, but I want you to work with another group as a part of it, or so-and-so has a similar mission, or it can align with your mission, you know, I'll fund it. And so, you know, really starting to get beyond the passion and work through collaboration, work through data, driving those decision-making processes, and really have a why and a how. So taking those pieces together and really saying, this is where we're going, this is how we're getting there. Because it's great if you say, to Ellen's note earlier, you know, we're going to cure poverty, but if you don't have the how, people are only going to listen for so long. And I think that's really where we've really started to see a shift in nonprofits away from that pure passion and effort into more of a data where and how environment. And I think the quicker you can get there, the more responsive everyone will be to how you handle it.
Thank you so much, Eric. All right, Maryanne, thoughts on the future for our nonprofits and how our nonprofit executives can get ahead?
This is more like my wish. I don't know if I can see into the future, but I have a wish. And my wish is, you know, for a long time we were taught we had to sacrifice ourselves so others can have. And I think that is definitely shifting. And this kind of wraps into the other question too about, you know, professional development. Fill your own cup. Take care of yourself. Be the inspiration that you seek, instead of the old model, which is, oh, I have to sacrifice so others can have. That is, and hustle is not sustainable. Ease and grace, it can be easy. It can flow to you. And I feel like that is the shift, like the internal shift I want to make. The external one for me is to release the belief that you can make somebody care. That requires you to change other people for them to be attracted to your mission. People are going to care not because of your marketing. And, you know, that's my thing. Okay. They care because of their lived experience, and that your organization is a way for them to express their greatest aspirations and desires. And you're connecting them with that. So it's moving away from, I need to make somebody care, to how can I attract those long-term loyal believers that are going to be with me through thick and thin, up and down, because we've all been around. We've seen all the changes, you know, and there's more coming. And that's what I want. Right? I want those people. And the way I get those people is to be, right, strong in my mission, message, and purpose, to attract those like-minded people. And I can just stop trying to make people care, because, you know, that's exhausting, because it doesn't work. So that would be my wish for everyone to adopt in the future.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Maryanne. All right, Ellen, final thoughts on the future and how we can get ahead today.
Well, first we can start by hiring people 35 years old and younger. I'm really passionate about this. And second, we have to, I have to talk to Eric later, because data is the story. Data tells the story. Data is the story. I'm not saying everybody in the world needs to be able to interpret a spreadsheet, but there are organizational disciplines that really are not difficult to deploy, that make it clear whether or not we're having an impact. that make it clear whether or not our fundraising team is walking into walls because they're not quite sure what to be doing or whom to be calling on. So we have to recognize that the metaphorical cost of an hour of opportunity risk, an hour of service delivery, just is skyrocketing there. And find people who can ride over the myriad distractions there are. And guess what? In 5 years from now, the myriad distractions will have risen by a quantum factor of some sort or another. So I am in the process of onboarding the youngest person I've ever onboarded. And I'm really excited about it because she has the ear of her contemporaries. She can tell the difference between what's working now for Easter Seals or the American Red Cross and what's gonna work for an organization that's emerging right now, Amplify Restorative Justice. Very, very different missions, very different kinds of appeals, very different expectations by the founders and leaders of these organizations because they are savvy. So if your organization has been around for a while and your ED and board are silver foxes in their 50s and 60s, start bringing in much younger people. Their perspectives are going to be very different, and they'll force you to the right level of discomfort that precedes change. So that's my recommendation. And I don't disagree with anybody else. I agree with all of the panelists on this. We've got to move with the times.
Thank you so much, Ellen. All right, I do have to have us wrap up. We're in our final minute. So huge thank you to our panelists. I know if we were in person, there'd be a round of applause. So just know I'm sharing that emotionally through the screen today. I do also want to give a big thank you to our audience, whether you joined us live or you're watching the recording. Thank you so much for your time. It has been a ton of fun. Please keep in touch. Continue to attend NXUnite panels. We have a packed fall of panels ahead of us. Sessions on, we have connecting with Gen Z donors, Q4 fundraising, building effective corporate partnerships, and more. So keep in touch. Thank you for your time, and I hope you all have a nice rest of your day. Thank you so much, panelists. Bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone.